Hello and welcome everyone. The name's Lily, bringing to you a very serious and important announcement. Are you sitting down? Did you clean your ears? Alright, here goes. Ahem. Twisted Wonderland Groovies kinda suck. Thank you. Like, share, and subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss my burning hot takes spoken from my precious soapbox.
Attention freaks, it's me.
Okay, I may be making this more dramatic than it actually is. I don't actually think the Groovies are bad. But if you play the game, there are a few things you notice about that game function that don't make a whole lot of sense, and I want to talk about that. You'd think I'd be at least a little tired from rambling about Twisted Wonderland, given I just made a massive video about it and still am working on part 2, but here's the thing! This game has me at gunpoint, and if I don't get these thoughtouts somewhere and somehow, I will seize existence into a million pieces. I figured I could squeeze in some discussions of latter topics in between my work on the deep dive in the form of short videos that are easier to edit. I mean, I did set out to make this one short, so if I fail that, I really only have myself to blame. The topic of this video, as you may have guessed by the title and the opening bit, is regarding TWST's Groovy card arts and how to me personally, a lot of the times they're kind of hit or miss, or are just plain confusing in their classification. So, without further ado, follow me into my rambling pit of madness. Let's first define the existence of groovy arts and other variants like it. This concept is pretty easy to understand, or well, it should be if you're accustomed to gacha games and the systems they usually use. Gacha games, mainly 2D card ones, often have this mechanic where you can unlock a different artwork for the card you just pulled, if you spend some in-game resources and meet the right unlocking requirements. They're usually a flashier, more special version of the card, showing off a different pose, a different setting, or a different expression on the character. Each game has a name for it. Project Sekai, for example, has untrained versus trained cards, and I think Shining Light had a special name for it too, but honestly it's been so long since I played it I really could not remember. Or download it for that matter so I could check, because apparently the game server shut down. Rest in pieces, Otoya, my middle school self will mourn you. So as you probably guessed by now, Twist is not the first or last gacha card game to have this system. They only have a little goofier name for it, the standard cards versus their groovy versions. In Twist, the different categories of the cards have different categories of the grooviest groovies. Our cards only get a few extra clouds and sparkles, but no different artwork. But SR cards and SSR cards both get new arts once the requirements unlock, though said requirements can vary depending on the card. Event-related groovies usually are only unlocked after you finish the main story of the event or past a certain date in real life. Cards released in new banners that don't accompany events or that are main story related only have the normal requirements, for the card to be at a certain level and for the player to have already read the vignette of the card, some cards being the exception. But what do the vignettes have to do with the groovies, you ask? Well, here's the thing. The groovies are meant to be the special images regarding said vignettes. They're supposed to be the visual of a scene that happens in the vignette story, though keep that detail in mind. We'll be coming back to it later. But yeah, most of the time, the reason you need to finish the vignette is because the new visual appears in it towards the end, which then allows you to unlock it on the card screen. Aside from those requirements, the cards also need a certain quantity of candies of that specific character, which you can buy in the shop or get it from alchemy lessons with said character. Though, like usual, event cards use different items in place of the candies, which can be acquired in the event shop. So after all of that, you might be thinking that unlocking a card grooving in Twist is a pretty extensive process. And yeah, that is correct. you use up a lot of stuff to get the Groovy art. Honey jars, snack towers, candies, event points, lesson points should you need it. If you don't have the necessary items, Groovying a card takes plenty of resources and time, even more so if you have multiple cards to Groovify. Which is why it is oh so disheartening when you unlock the Groovy arts and the supposed reward for your efforts is lackluster, disappointing, or just flat out bad.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
I want you to focus your attention on these 3 boys. They're lovely boys, high quality boys, 10 out of 10 boys. These are Kalim, Jamil, and Leona. Got a good look? Alright, now I want to introduce you to 3 other boys. Please welcome Kyle, James, and Liam. Actually, no, don't welcome them. You are welcome to boo them off the stage. Whose mans are these? Who left them here? I do apologize for the triple white person jump scare. With so many of them, you'd think we'd suddenly started playing FNAF Security Breach. But no, these are legit, official, and approved Groovy cards for the recent events in the Japanese server. SSR cards, might I add. You know, the types which are supposed to be top tier, high rarity cards. Yeah. Jokes aside, it is unfortunate, but recently, TWST has been experiencing some very blatant and very bad cases of whitewashing when it comes to the people of color characters. Leon was the first. His hometown event, Tamashi Namina, was released in the Japanese version back in February, with him as the featured SSR character on the banner. And the fandom collectively agreed this was a beautiful as heck card. Like, look at this man. Look at him! Leona is one of the prettiest characters in the game, with it even being recognized in-universe. If you look past the old man energy and the exposed toes, therein lies a legit snack. And I want you to keep this detail in mind. Not the one about Leona being hot, though you are also free to remember that. No, I want you to focus on how pretty the card is in its standard average version. I will return to this point as well later in the video. Anyway, the point is, top tier card. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Can't wait for the Groovy. Ew! Oh boy. Yeah, this was an ice bucket on the previous excitement over the card. First and foremost, his skin color. People try to excuse this by saying, oh, he's standing in a light-heavy place, so it makes his skin look lighter. Except, no, that makes no sense. Number 1, that's not how lighting works. Number 2, Leona has had cards where he stands in the light, and he wasn't colored like this. This was just bad and disrespectful and very much so whitewashing. But also, this Groovy is just so boring. Like, look again at the standard version. The composition, the pose, the background, his expression, the clothing, it's all so good and so much more interesting to look at. And then the Groovy is just, here's a white man driving, there's a big rock in the distance, we have a live action movie. Buy your stuff. Even if you look past the whitewashing, which you really shouldn't look past, the card is way worse than the standard version. I mean, Lilia occupies just as much of the screen as Leona. It isn't even his card. What are you doing here, Lilia? All the other cards from this event feature the characters as the focus on the Groovy, but Leona's, the highest card in rarity of the event, has to share the spotlight with Lilia and be turned into a generic white man number 84. Awful, terrible, get this card out of here.
What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that, a fucking cat? Hey! Don't fucking look at me like that. That's a weird looking fucking cat. Ma! Yo, there's a stray cat outside. I don't want it starting a fight with Lucy. Lucy, it's okay. It's okay, Lucy. Don't worry about it. Ma! Ma, there's a weird fucking stray cat outside. It looks like Grandma, the fucking thing. Hey, get the fuck out of here!
Fans were rightfully pissed off and contacted TWST about it, but no response was given, and the visual was not changed in any patch update. It was regrettable, but we had to move along and hope this didn't happen again. So naturally, it happened again. This happened on the second event of the Wonderland series, where TWST once again did a special collab with the Sun-style plushies, that are basically just characters shaped like little baked beans? Little small creatures? It's cute. They're not exclusive to TWST, a lot of franchises have their own, but the game has done 2 events featuring the Suns, interacting with their normal human versions in the universe, complete with story, music, and of course, special event cards. The first event featured the 2 House Wardens, Riddle and Leona, as the SSR cards. And wow, look at that! Leona in the light looking normal and not bleached. And in the second event of the collab, they did the same with 2 other House Wardens, Azul and Kalim. So far so good, the standard versions were charming and beautiful, and Kalim's had an amazing composition with the flying pose. Like, look at him, that's my son, I love him so much. Since the first event had amazing Groovies featuring the entire dorm posing with the Suns, players were naturally very excited to see the new art for these 2 cards once the event ended. So everyone waited with bated breath, and then... yeah... it happened again. This time we got a 2-for-1 combo, as Kalim's Groovy featured what was supposed to be him and Jamil.
Sure, Jan.
It was just inexcusable at this point, honestly. The staff surely were aware of the responses and complaints when Leona's Groovy came out, and yet this passed all of the checkpoints of approval to be put and published into the game. Wanna know what's even more appalling? Jamil already had a card in this exact scenario before. In his and Kalim's hometown event, his SSR standard visual was this exact composition, framed from a low angle against a background of fireworks lighting up in the night sky. They already had this. They did this one right. He looks normal here. Does the staff just not know the existence of the eyedrop tool in most drawing programs? This is to say, there is no possible flimsy excuse in the situation. I mean, there shouldn't even be excuses, not even in Leona's case. This is whitewashing, plain and simple. But in this case, there's literally proof the lighting has nothing to do with his skin color suddenly being bleached off. Once again, the fans were outraged and disappointed, trying to contact the staff to have them correct this. And, just like before, there hasn't been any response or update fixing it. Ever since launch, TWST really hadn't had this issue before. Granted, they don't have a lot of POC characters to begin with, which is a whole other can of worms, but the ones they did have were at least always represented accurately in the card so far, at least from what I know of. I really liked seeing this representation, even if it was small. Anime culture as a whole is still a bit behind in terms of including characters of color in projects, so it really made me happy that TWST at least had some diversity. Which makes things even worse is that the sudden occurrence happened to 3 out of 4 main characters that are not paler than a sheet of paper. Someone please hijack, he's the only one we have left. The only explanation I can think of is that this could be the result of hiring a new coloring artist who didn't grasp the ropes yet? Maybe? But I am not being paid to be the devil's advocate for a company that definitely does not need any defending and has plenty of money to just recolor 2 cards and maybe provide a new color palette for the new staff they hire, you know, as a treat. Furthermore, the lack of response from the game is very frustrating. It's not like TWST hasn't messed up before and released an update to fix it. If you were around in the English release of the Spectral Soyuri event, you probably remember that they released the event with a bunch of special sprites missing, which made the scenes extra goofy. But later, the game just released a patch to fix it. And that was that. No harm, no foul. Keep in mind, I'm not saying all of this to bash on the staff and the game. for the most part. I know that, like most game companies, Twist has a lot of moving parts, and staff members involved in every aspect of the game, and not all of them are involved in the bleaching. I mean, look at the standard visuals, they're still great. But that doesn't change the fact that this is the second time Twist pulls the stunt and hasn't done anything to correct it. Eventually, the fans are gonna get tired of waiting. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really love this game if it wasn't already obvious by the amount of time I spent talking about it. But just because you love a piece of media does not mean you can't criticize it, and Twist warrants plenty of criticism when it comes to this. In the end, it's just very disheartening to see the very little representation the game offers be chipped away bit by bit under our noses. So please, fix your shit, Twisted Wonderland. You really don't want to take the goodwill of your fans for granted. However, aside from all of this, there is something else that also greatly astounds me regarding the Twist Groovies. Something that is a little more subtle, but very much so present since the beginning of the game, making itself more and more present in the cards, and that is the inconsistency. Okay, so in the last section, I admit I was pretty intense and negative, so in this bit, I promise I will try to be more lighthearted. Emphasis on try. I swear I love this game, okay? I promise, I do. It's one of my favorite visual novels ever, but I gotta talk about this to someone. So now we're gonna go over the consistency in the Groovy artworks, both in terms of art quality and in thematic aesthetic. The first one is pretty simple. Is the visual good? Was it rendered well? Are all the proportions on point? Is it a flop or a slay? Stuff like that. This one stays mostly consistent through the whole collection of cards. For all the criticism I'm laying on it, Twisted Wonderland is an insanely beautiful game. The aesthetic is on point everywhere, from the backgrounds to the in-game items to the UI icons. So while there are some cards that could definitely benefit from a little more love and time in the oven, the art stays at a nice quality 90% of the time. What I mainly want to focus on then is regarding the other topic I highlighted, the consistency in fitting the cards and events theme with the character's aesthetic and personality. Let's take the character Rook Hunt, for example, the light of my life, my love, my precious, my silly little man. I want you to look at two Groovies available for Rook's cards. There's this one and this one. Based on visuals alone, you'd probably think that these two cards are kinda in the same level of rarity, or even that this one is of higher rarity, given the uniqueness of the setting, pose, and expression. This scene is really only something that can be expressed through an elaborate artwork, and it fits perfectly not only to the theme of the Being Fast event, hunting for opposing students, having to hide and use the forced setting to one's advantage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike and win a point, but it also serves to tell with visuals alone how Rook feels in this situation. Even if you had no context of the card or the event, you could see that he is striving to be there. He is enjoying himself so much, lying in wait for his prey to walk by him, not noticing he's watching their every move. His expression conveys how much joy he takes from hunting, and his relaxed stance shows how confident he is in his skill. He's not tense or grabbing the branches for support. He's leaning almost casually, as if this was a normal stroll in the woods on a casual day. He's a little stalker weirdo. It's part of his charm. Overall, my point is, this is a great Groovy. It highlights aspects of the character in a fitting way for the scenario, while also being incredibly visually pleasing and super dynamic. But what about the other card? It's also a Groovy and it shows the same character, so let's analyze it to see what it tells us. Let's start with the pose. At first glance, you might not realize it, but this isn't something new for Rook. It is actually quite a common pose that he does with his model in-game. One hand over his heart, while the other points away from him. The angle and composition of the Groovy make it a bit more dramatic and add extra sparkles to it though. In terms of the background, there's nothing of importance. He's just standing and not interacting with anything around him. Apple is there too, because he was accompanying Rook in the vignette. And, like I said, the Groovies are allegedly supposed to follow the vignette setting. But he's not doing anything special either, just looking a bit taken aback by Rook's mannerisms, as is one's common reaction to him. So, to summarize, one card shows what a poor innocent student sees in his last living moments as he unfortunately falls prey to the hunter waiting in the shadows. The other shows a scenario that one can run into during a normal day at Ninth Rift College, where Rook is being his eccentric, dramatic self in a public space. It's a fine groovy, a little lackluster and not that exciting, but good to look at nonetheless. Rook still looks great in it. And hey, it's not the highest rarity, so I guess it doesn't need to be that outstanding. At least that's what I wanted to say, but no, because this card is not only an SSR, but is also Rook's fucking dorm uniform. The card that is released along with the main story. That means it is supposed to be special. And they decide to take a fucking off-the-walls character like Rook and give him such a normal, almost boring groovy? Why?
But you did this for what?
Why not?
Why?
Why not?
Why though?
Excuse me, I lost my composure for a moment. But yeah, this groovy, at least to me, doesn't really feel any special. Like, I am a very dedicated Rook fan and I do love him a lot, and yes, I did go broke in terms of gems trying to get this card, but it's not because I love the card itself, mainly because I love Rook and I wanted to read his personal story. Though I admit I have pulled for cards just because of how pretty the art is. Fairy Gala Ortho is my proof. Back then when the card was released, I was enamored by the visual so much I was just determined to get it right. In isolation, Rook's dorm groovy is not too bad. It is a crime to me personally because I am being overly dramatic right now, but it is still a pretty card with detailed artwork that clearly had care put into it. And it is charming, don't get me wrong, it still shows Rook being the little weirdo that he is, but it doesn't feel special to be classified as a groovy, because it's something we see in the story and vignettes all the time. Rook isn't even the solo character in the card. Like, I love Apple, he's my son, but there isn't any reason for him to be included here. There are cards that feature other characters in the background, and some pull this off really well, like with Vil's dorm uniform, which features Apple and Rook, but the framing of this one is vastly different, since the two boys are placed like set dressings to the main course that is Vil. They stand by him as he sits on the throne, like servants to the evil queen. It's a masterful way to frame their relationship in terms of the dorm hierarchy, and it makes sense. But in this one, why is Apple here? Just to look cute? I mean, I appreciate it, and he does look cute, but And at this point, failing to make the card feel special and focus mainly on the featured character is especially prevalent in the dorm uniform card sets. These cards have the biggest cases of hitting very high highs and very low lows. To explain this, let's go back to one of the points I asked you to keep in mind, the standard visual looking better than the groovy visual. Despite everything I've said, Rook's dorm uniform still manages to be one of my favorite cards because of how good the standard visual is. Like, look at it. It basically has all the things I liked about his Being Fast card, but now he's dressed in the beautiful purple of the Pomefiore uniform, wielding his preferred weapon of choice and wearing his iconic feather hat. With the background of the forest and the angle looking down on him, the composition is great. Let's get two more examples of the dorm uniform set and see how the standard versions are better than the groovies. First, we have our boy, Riddle. On top of being a powerhouse in terms of magic attacks and HP, Riddle's dorm card is also iconic since it's very commonly a player's first dorm uniform card when starting the game. If it's not his, then it's likely his Leona dorm card, which, by the way, is great on both visuals. The lineman knows how to serve on all occasions when they allow him to keep his skin color. Riddle's standard visual is pretty great, actually. It frames him in what I believe to be a trial room in the Harslebue dorm, which the manga confirms it indeed has. Alright, not the weirdest thing for the school to have, I guess. They allow Vargas on campus. Riddle is shot from an angle where he's looking down at the camera, all high and mighty on this judge's throne. It is a great shot because it shows how Riddle looks at the world. He's the judge, jury, and executioner. He wields this dorm staff like a weapon, which is accurate given how powerful his magic is. And he sees himself as being above others, always in the right. And he is glaring at the camera, shouting even, as if he's in the middle of carrying out one of his trademark beheadings with his unique magic. Not only is this a great look at the tyrant Riddle used to be back in book 1, it's also fascinating to realize that since then, he never really had another card framed like this, where he's looking down at someone. In fact, when he sees him again in his dorm uniform attire in the Consider card, he's looking up at the camera, surrounded by his dorm companions and smiling. I don't know if this was intentional, but I really do love his silent continuity of his character through just the card visuals alone. Sadly though, I can't say I am the biggest supporter of his dorm uniform Groovy. Just like Rook's, it's not a bad art. Far from it. I am not making this much effort to bash on the poor artist, guys. Like, I get the struggle, trust me. But this is an interesting choice. It's a wide shot, so the background is very detailed with all the little knickknacks of the dorm lounge, which takes a bit of the attention away from the characters in focus. Speaking of the characters, just like with Apple accompanying Rook, now we have Trey and Cater accompanying Riddle. And I'm not gonna lie, every time I see this card, my first instinct is to focus on Cater. He and Riddle kinda share the middle points of the card with Trey off to the side, but they gave such a goofy and comically exaggerated expression to Cater, it is an immediate attention grabber for me personally. Look at this little dumbass. Unlike in the standard version, where Riddle literally has a spotlight from the Disney gods shining upon him, in the Groovy, all three characters are washed in the same soft hue of light coming from the window, making it so that none of them truly stand out, which is something the Rook Groovy art at least took into account, making Rook shine and sparkle in the light, while Apple is more muted in the background. So yeah, for me personally, Riddle's standard dorm visual outshines his Groovy, but I can still appreciate it for what it is, trying to say, along with the vignette, that Riddle will willingly go out of his way to help a fellow dorm member, and get a bit carried away in the process. It is cute and very charming, and while it could have been framed better, it gets across a good enough message about who Riddle is underneath the tyrant's mask. It's a silent and commendable character work, which is not something I can say about the next dorm Groovy I wanna dissect. Oh boy, okay, let's talk about Jade. Now, unlike the previous cards I talked about, Jade's Dorm SSR is not a card I own yet. Someday, definitely, but alas, not yet. But I have read a summary of the vignettes and have seen how the Octo Trio each has a part of this side narrative going on in the vignettes. The three of them being part of a set is actually one of the best things about the Dorm standard visuals. You can see that it's all different angles of the very same pose, Azul sitting in the middle with Floyd and Jade by his side, as if the three of them got the same picture taken together. It's very cute and it shows how integral they all are to each other. In terms of Groovies, Azul's and Floyd's are pretty good. Azul's once again frames all the three fishies in the same wide shot, with him in the middle as always, and Floyd gets a really cool angle of looking down at the camera with especially the range look of his. It's great, I love it. I also don't have his card, but I've read that apparently he's threatening Sam, which is very on brand, go get him. In comparison to those two, we have Jade. Oh, Jade. He has these chaotic moments in some cards and looks badass in others too, but in this one, I'm sorry, I gotta say it, he really just looks like a discount Sebastian Michaelis from Black Butler. Like, don't get me wrong, the comparison is not new. People have been associating Jade to Sebastian ever since his character design was shown. And yeah, they do look similar and have sort of a similar personality if you take into account the over-the-top fake politeness and the barely hidden desire for unholy crimes. But in this shot, with how he's dressed and how the angle is framed, he really just looks like a butler to Phil, helping him with his shoes and all. And also, once again, we have someone who is not the card's assigned character taking up space in the shot. Plus, let's all be honest with ourselves, with Phil's heeled foot right there, no one is really paying attention to Jade. I'm sorry, buddy. Jokes aside, I know this makes more sense in the context of the vignette, where Jade is being a little silly prankster and manipulating Will under Azul's request, but like, that's not the vibe the card passes. And without the context of the vignette, it really doesn't show any aspect of Jade's character aside from servitude, I guess. But that really isn't accurate to who Jade is. Like, you could lack the context of Floyd's vignette, but you definitely know that he's not someone to be messed with. There are other ways to convey that Jade was having a little gaslight gatekeep girl boss moment without it being framed like this. I don't know, maybe place him listening in behind a door, or smirking behind someone's back. I feel like that would convey a lot more of his personality without having to rely on the vignette context. In the end, all these grooves I've highlighted have one thing in common. They don't feel like special enough rewards for the trouble the player goes through to get them. Not only do you already suffer massive trauma by even attempting a gacha pull, you also have to grind the card and read the vignette in order to unlock the visual. And, as you might have noticed, that's what we always seem to come back to, the vignette, or the personal story as it is called in the Japanese version. From the way I've been talking, it would almost seem like the vignettes are somehow a detriment to the card's visuals, but that actually couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I go so far as to argue that the vignettes are one of the most important aspects of determining whether or not a card is worth getting from a narrative perspective. Let's delve a little deeper into that, shall we? I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that more than half of the appeal to pull for a card is to read the vignette, while the rest is wanting to own a picture of a very beautiful man. Mwah. Thank you for coming home. Anyway, like I explained before, Groovies and their personal stories are supposed to be intricately linked. They show a scene featured in the card's story to help visualize it, which often ends up resulting in such visual being a bit sillier and more casual than the standard CG. But, like everything else about this feature, this too is inconsistent, because it's not every card that had the Groovy follow what the vignette was about. Here's some easy examples. Jade's ceremonial robes. In no scene of the vignette we are placed on a setting of Jade walking through Octavinelle. The story was about how shady his and Azul's methods can be, so this framing does not make a one-for-one recreation of a scene in the personal story. Ruggy's campwear. Literally 99% of the vignette is a flashback to when Ruggy recruited Apple for their Spell Drive club, and only in the last 3 lines they mention fishing. So while the visual is kinda explained by being shoved in there at the last second, it is not at all a recreation of a scene in the story. Ortho's Fairy Gala If, the most gorgeous card in the game, I think we all can agree. The vignette is all about Ortho talking to his friends in the gym, which means that if they followed their constantly broken rule of Groovy equals vignette, it would have needed to be a completely different setting. But instead, Ortho's card, and honestly the other Fairy Gala cards too, don't follow the setting of the vignettes, choosing instead to frame the characters in the ambience that would better complement their dashing looks. Anyway, you get the gist. Once again, inconsistency strikes in the rules Groovies follow, by which I mean they follow none. I think the artists and devs just go with the flow and don't think about it too hard. Unlike this nerd you're listening to. Still, I think that some cards benefit from being tied to the vignettes, since they have some very good visuals that are complemented by the character's dialogue, but others would have really shined even more if they just didn't feel the need to replicate the scenario established by the vignette, and instead use it as an inspiration for the Groovy. Going back to Project Sakai for a moment, while I don't play it, I asked my friend's opinion on it, since she has dual citizenship on Twist and Project Sakai, and she explained to me some some of the aspects that make those cards usually more appealing to her than the ones we have in Twist. In Project Sakai, the untrained versions of the cards are usually the ones that show simpler and even sillier scenes, with more lighthearted interactions or standard composition, sometimes even having multiple characters appear that aren't the main one of the card. That creates a juxtaposition with the trained version, where the featured character is the main focus, wearing the card outfit and posing in a more dramatic effect, which helps create a more special look. This is the complete opposite of what happens with Twist, where, like I said, the Groovies often contain the goofier moments of the vignettes and feature Easter eggs of characters that were part of it. Just look how many times Deuce appears in the cards that aren't even his, my boy's everywhere. That makes it that much easier to confuse standard and groovy versions, and more often than not, cards with the most insanely gorgeous standard visuals have the most lackluster groovies. One thing you tend to notice once you look at all the groovies currently available is that for a magical school setting where every character can perform various feats of wonder, very little magic is actually featured in the groovy cards. So far we only have a total of 4: Leona's dorm uniform, Silver's Halloween, Sebek's dorm uniform, and Lilia's Master Chef. And no, I am not counting the broom cats as displays of magic. They're just floating around. It's not a special, unique magic that the characters have. It's just they're just flying on the brooms. The point is, so far, Twist hasn't really tried much with doing creative compositions with the characters performing feats only they can do, with some recent exceptions actually. There have been 2 cards released recently for Book 7 that kinda go unironically hard with showing off not only the setting the characters are in, but also the wildly new angles to frame the shots. I'll show them blurred here so you know which ones I'm talking about if you follow the spoilers, but even so, these are only the 2 very recent cards, so at the moment they're the exceptions and not the norm. I get that they don't want to show too much of the background and setting in the visuals, since the character is meant to be the focus, and if that was just that, I'd say it was a valid point. But unfortunately, when it comes to the characters, they also kind of fumble the landing a bit. For starters, there isn't much range of emotion present, right? I'm not talking about the story, mind you, God knows how many times I've cried because of the voice actor's performance. But when it comes to the expressions, there isn't much showing of a different range of emotions. There are times the characters have shown disgruntled expressions, and even some that are delightfully goofy, like Iria's and Jade's. But when it comes to unfiltered emotion like sadness or inner turmoil, I think the closest we have is Ortho's "Do you wanna build a snowman" moment in his ceremonial robes card. A great example of an opportunity they had to pull this one off would have been with Cater's Halloween card actually, since the main focus of the vignette is how Cater feels disconnected and alone from his peers because of his upbringing and coping mechanisms when it comes to loneliness. He feels bitter towards Lilia because he wouldn't be able to understand how alone Cater feels, how he is used to things ending and not maintaining connections. It would have been great to see these emotions featured in the groovy art. Cater has had a more somber groovy in the form of his ceremonial robes, but in that one it is a lot more vague and muted. If they wanted to follow the vignette here, it was a golden opportunity. But unfortunately, no, we get a skeletons laying out of the grave. Talk about a tone shift. When you choose to serve instead of processing trauma. It's also why so many people clamor and pray on the streets of a release of some form of the Overblot cards. Because those were moments full of anguish and passion and symbolism, and you felt such raw emotion from the character, and the designs were so good. It's also why the fans liked reading the manga interpretation of the Overblot, because it wasn't afraid to risk with more extreme expressions that aren't really well translated through the in-game models. Twist has had a lot of opportunities to show off more evocative cards, and it's unfortunate that it hasn't really taken many of them. I know these characters are teens, often put through over-the-top situations during the events that tend to lean more on the happy and carefree side, which doesn't leave a lot of time to show vulnerability. But it would still be nice to have some down-to-earth moments, you know? In that sense, the clubwear cards would have been a good moment for this, showing off a more casual side of the character that could have been highlighted in the vignette of the card. Oh, but what's that? Twist is just releasing cards with no rhyme or reason without personal stories? Oh, that's an odd choice that doesn't make a lot of sense. But hey, I guess now with the game just giving up on giving the new cards accompanying personal stories, maybe they can just improve the Groovies. Except I rather have the stories, because they're the reason I pull for the cards.
Drake? What? Where's the door hole?
One of the few things I've seen the fandom collectively agree on is that we're all devastated that the Clubware cards don't have personal stories. Because for once, we would see the characters in a daily life scenario, outside of the formality of classes, but also removed from the unusual circumstances that most of these special events bring. They'd just be living their lives, doing their funny little activities with friends and having a good time. And we wanted to see that. But alas, it was denied from us. I still don't know why TWST would think this was a good idea. It all started with the Wonderland cards, where the SRs didn't have personal stories explaining the shenanigans they got up to with their sums. But at least the SSRs had some. But then, they started to release the club cards with Kalim being the first. And, like I said, they just don't give a single hint of a vignette. The best we get in terms of story and characterization are the voice lines of the character in the main screen when you get the card. Ah yes, let me pull for this character only to receive a piece of furniture for my troubles. Then came Glorious Masquerade, the massive event in place of Halloween for Year 3 in the Japanese server. But unlike the Halloween event, where every single card had a vignette, apparently for these, the R cards just don't have it. What? No! Why would you think I would want to know more about the characters and their experience in anime friends and learn more about how they interact in new experiences? Don't be silly! And now, recently, not only TWST has continued to release badass cards with no vignettes, they also started to just drop cards that have nothing to do with the event or setting and call it a day. Literally filler cards. Scalding Sandsville has no reason to exist aside from serving. But what is serving without substance? Nothing. That's what it is. Vil was mentioned maybe once during the original event, and now he was giving an SSR in the rerun. But unlike Ghost Marriage, which changed a bit of the story of the event to feature Iria in the suitor suit during the rerun, Vil's presence wasn't increased in the second coming of the event. He just wasn't there. He didn't travel with them, didn't feature in a phone call, didn't even appear in a flashback. He literally had no presence in this event. We only know how he got this outfit because one of his voice lines says that Trey brought it over for him when he came back from the trip, which sorta makes this kinda funny because it implies that both visuals were taken in front of a green screen, since, you know, he got the clothes back at Night Raven College, not the Scalding Sands locations. So you know, this is all Photoshop. Vil is not actually there. Maybe Rook is the one taking the picture. And this decision just reeks of pure laziness. Like, I'm sorry, but why not give Kalim a card? You know, the other Scalding Sands resident featured in this event who didn't get a special set of clothing? Hell, even Lilia would make more sense than Vil, since he was originally meant to go but got sick and missed the trip. It actually wouldn't be the first card of a character who didn't feature in the event, since Lilia himself has one for the Ghost Spread event. But at least in that one, he got a personal story explaining how and why he got dressed up all fancy. Vil got nothing, because this card means nothing. It's just a lazy set dressing. And even if you are a Vil fan, I really don't see any other reason to pull for this card when there are so many others more rewarding than it. Like, yeah, Vil is wonderful and beautiful and I love looking at him, but I wouldn't want to spend my hard-earned gems just getting a card that literally brings me nothing.
There's nothing here!
Which in the end results in this trend not making a lot of sense. Because my first instincts for this was just, oh, Disney TWST wants more money, because Disney always wants money, so they released a filler card to get the player base to roll for it and keep the gacha flowing.
We've got to have money.
But they don't even give us a reason to pull for these cards. For any of these cards. Like, they look good, but if that's all it is, I can just stare at the PNG in the wiki. So if the motivation was getting money, it's not really convincing. But if the motivation was saving money, then it starts to make sense. Because all of this I've talked about, wonky faces, blatant whitewashing, lack of personal stories, all of this screams of tight schedules and crunch time, where the game team is, more than likely, not getting enough resources to view the products they're putting out, to ensure that it's the best version it can be with all the features it should have. The mouse is everywhere, always watching, evidenced by the hidden eldritch rat symbols in the backgrounds and in the visuals. There is no escape from him. And I think because of this, the sense that corporations like Disney are these high and mighty overlords that shan't be touched by lesser beings makes a lot of us normal humans down here feel intimidated by the idea of raising critiques against them. But Disney isn't untouchable, nor is it above criticism. God, it really isn't above criticism. But at the end of the day, TWST is a product meant to provide to its audience, which means whether Aniplex or Disney like it or not, the success of the game really depends on the happiness of its consumer base. So if you have aspects of the game that displease you or that you think they can do better, go ahead and make your opinion known. Though of course, while also making sure to keep it civil and level-headed. No one respects the screaming opinions of wronged fans, no matter how much said screaming is justified or not. And with that, we can do our best and hope that the team behind TWST at least hears the voices of their fans, maybe even striving to change their methods in the areas they're lacking. And if everything else fails, we can take the route of Kingdom Hearts and choke slam the rats into the wall. Hey, if you reached this part into the video, congrats, you reached the end! I hope you enjoyed my ramblings about TWST, and if you did, please leave a like on the video, it will make me really happy. This one was a little more casual and not as lore-packed, I guess, as the deep dive, but I still had a lot of fun making it, because I really love gushing about the card and the art and the game as a whole. It might not have looked like it, but a good chunk of this game is top tier. I just mainly talked about the outliers, the cards that just needed a little more love and just a different approach. Believe it or not, there's actually a lot I left out of the videos to not get over the 1 hour mark. So I'll speedrun some of my cut points really quick here, okay? Okay, number 1, more casual clothes for the characters, please. It's been 3 years and we have no idea what these people wear outside of the prison walls of this damn school. Number 2, more character interactions in the cards. I don't mean some body parts of the characters making a cameo in the visual. Make it so they're actively interacting, like in the anniversary Groovies. Please, there's so very little of interactions, I am begging you. Number 3, if you're gonna make the Groovy less pretty and dazzling than the standard, at least make it more introspective about the character. I can excuse a bad Groovy if you can give me more reasons to go insane over the blurble on social media. Number 4, more creativity. There's so many characters in so many settings, in so much magic. I am frothing at the mouth. Why aren't they using them? Number 5, bring back the vignettes. This is a warning and a threat. Anyway, I still have more to say about the cards, mainly the Groovies. I might make a video ranking them soon, so if you want to be notified when that comes out, make sure to subscribe and check the little bell so YouTube lets you know when I upload. Before I go though, I have a little special announcement. A pair of good friends of mine is kicking off a D&D style roleplay called The Epiphany of Snow and its Undying Ember. It's set in a high fantasy world, where 6 gods currently rule their own nations, but it seems as though trouble is afoot when the locked away goddess of chaos shows signs of awakening. It is up to the brave adventurers and knights to rise up to the challenge and protect the nations. It's a really fun project, and my friends have been working on it for years, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, I've linked below the animatics trailer and the Discord link for the server where it will take place. If you want to take a shot at making an OC or just to hang out with us, we'll welcome you with open arms. And with that, I hope you all have a great day or night, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.